There is a country in the middle of Europe that swore, after the worst war in human history, that it would never build a big army again. That same country is now building the largest military in Europe. And almost nobody outside of Europe is talking about it. For 80 years, Germany was the quiet nation, the one that paid for its past by staying small, staying careful, staying peaceful. That era is ending right now, in real time, and the world is barely watching. Before we go further, if you are new here, this channel is called Jiang Analysis, and every week we break down the real story behind the headlines, the parts nobody else explains clearly. If that sounds useful to you, hit like and subscribe right now, because this video is going to connect dots that most news channels simply refuse to connect. So let's start with the simple question everyone is quietly asking. Is Germany, the country that once caused 2 world wars, now pushing Europe toward a third confrontation with Russia? To understand this, you have to go back to February 2022, the month Russia invaded Ukraine. That single event cracked open something that had been sealed shut in German politics for generations. Within days, the German chancellor stood in parliament and announced what he called a turning point. In German, Zeitenwende. A word that would define the next chapter of European history. He promised over 100 billion euros for the military, almost overnight. For a country that had spent decades keeping its defense budget deliberately small, this was a shock to everyone watching. Germany's constitution, written after World War II, was designed specifically to prevent this exact scenario. No large standing army, no aggressive posture, no repeat of history. But once that turning point speech happened, the guardrails started coming down, one by one, faster than almost anyone expected them to. Fast forward to today, and Germany has committed to raising defense spending far beyond NATO's minimum target. We are talking about numbers that would have been politically impossible just 5 years ago. There is now serious talk in Berlin about bringing back military conscription, a policy Germany abolished back in 2011. Young Germans may soon be required to register for possible service again. Defense companies inside Germany are expanding factories at a pace not seen since the Cold War. Tank production lines that were nearly shut down are now running around the clock. And here is the part that should really catch your attention. Germany isn't just arming itself. It is becoming the main hub for arming the rest of Europe against Russia. German-made weapons, German-funded training programs, and German logistics networks are now flowing into countries all along NATO's eastern border, from Poland to the Baltic states. Some analysts call this responsible deterrence. Others call it something far more dangerous, the slow rebuilding of exactly the kind of military machine Europe spent 80 years trying to prevent. Let's look at the numbers, because they tell a story words alone cannot. Germany's military budget has roughly doubled since 2021. That is not a small policy shift. That is a complete reversal of national identity. The German army, once mocked internationally for broken equipment and outdated gear, is now on track to become the largest conventional force in Western Europe within the next few years. Meanwhile, Russia has repeatedly signaled, through both diplomatic channels and state media, that it views this buildup as a direct provocation, not a defensive measure. And here is where the real danger sits. When one side calls something defense and the other side calls the exact same thing aggression, history shows us that misunderstanding rarely stays peaceful for long. Germany's leaders insist this is purely about deterrence, about making sure Russia never even considers testing NATO's eastern flank the way it tested Ukraine's borders. But critics inside Germany itself, including members of parliament, are asking a harder question. Once you build a war machine this large, does it eventually need a war to justify its own existence? This is not a new pattern in history. Nations that rearm rapidly often find themselves pulled toward confrontation, even when their original intention was purely defensive. Now, here is something most international coverage misses completely. Germany is not doing this alone. It is actively pulling the rest of the European Union along with it. France has its own nuclear deterrent and its own defense industry. But Germany's economic weight inside the EU gives Berlin enormous influence over collective European military policy. Poland, the Baltic states, and several Nordic countries have welcomed German leadership on this issue, seeing Berlin as finally stepping up after decades of what they viewed as free riding on American protection. But other European nations are far more hesitant. Hungary and Slovakia have openly questioned whether this rapid militarization actually makes Europe safer, or simply makes conflict more likely. The European Union as a whole has now approved joint defense, spending packages worth hundreds of billions of euros, much of it flowing directly through German industrial capacity. This means Germany's decisions are no longer just German decisions. They are shaping the military posture of an entire continent of over 400 million people. Let's talk about why this matters so much for regular people watching from the United States, because this story is not staying contained inside Europe. If tensions between NATO and Russia continue escalating, the United States is treaty-bound through NATO to respond if any member state is attacked. That includes every country bordering Russia, which means decisions being made right now in Berlin, decisions about tanks, missiles, and troop numbers, could eventually pull American forces into a direct confrontation nobody actually wants. Energy markets are already feeling the pressure too. European rearmament is driving up demand for raw materials, semiconductors, and industrial capacity that ripples straight into global supply chains. Defense stocks have surged. German companies that make armored vehicles and ammunition have seen their value climb dramatically since the war in Ukraine began. Some economists argue this military spending boom is actually propping up parts of the German economy that were struggling with an energy crisis and industrial slowdown after losing cheap Russian gas. In other words, there may be a financial incentive, not just a security incentive, behind Germany's rapid transformation into Europe's military leader. Now let's address the historical weight of all this, because it is impossible to separate Germany's military buildup from its past without sounding naive. For decades, German leaders across every political party agreed on one unshakable rule. Germany would never again be the country that starts a war in Europe. That rule shaped German foreign policy so deeply that even discussing sending weapons to conflict zones was considered politically toxic for most of the post-war era. Now, in less than 4 years, that entire framework has flipped. Germany is not just sending weapons, it is manufacturing them, funding them, and coordinating their distribution across an entire alliance. For many older Germans who grew up being taught about their nation's darkest chapter in school, watching this shift happen feels deeply uncomfortable, even frightening. Younger Germans, by contrast, largely see it differently. Many grew up watching Russian aggression in Ukraine unfold live on their phones, and they view rearmament as simple common sense. This generational divide is playing out in German politics right now, with rising political parties on both the far left and far right, using this exact tension to win votes. Some of those parties argue Germany is being manipulated into becoming NATO's frontline warehouse, arming a war that mainly benefits American defense contractors and Washington's strategic interests. Others argue the opposite, that Germany's hesitation and pacifism over the decades is exactly what allowed Russia to believe it could invade a European neighbor without serious consequences. Both sides cannot be entirely right, but the fact that this debate is even happening at this scale tells you how much German society has changed in just a few short years. So where does this actually lead? Let's walk through the realistic paths forward, because this is where the story gets genuinely important for everyone watching globally. The optimistic scenario is straightforward. Germany's buildup successfully deters Russia from any further aggression, tensions gradually stabilize, and Europe enters a new era of managed deterrence, similar to the Cold War standoff that technically never became a hot war. The pessimistic scenario is far darker. Continued military escalation on both sides eventually leads to a miscalculation, a border incident, a cyber attack, or an accidental military engagement that spirals faster than diplomats can contain it. History has shown us both outcomes are possible from similar starting conditions. The difference often comes down to communication channels between rival powers staying open, even during high tension. Right now, direct communication between Berlin and Moscow is nearly non-existent. Diplomatic channels that existed for decades have been frozen since the invasion of Ukraine began. That absence of communication is, according to many foreign policy experts, one of the most dangerous elements of the current situation, more dangerous even than the weapons themselves. Without regular dialogue, small incidents can be misread as intentional provocations, and misread provocations are exactly how conflicts that nobody wanted end up starting anyway. If you have made it this far into the video, you clearly care about understanding what is actually happening in the world beyond the surface-level headlines, and that is exactly why this channel exists. Drop a comment below and tell me whether you think Germany's military buildup makes Europe safer or more dangerous, because honestly, this is one of the most divisive questions in European politics today. If this video helped you understand the situation more clearly, please share it with someone who has been confused by the constant headlines about Germany, Russia, and NATO tension. Sharing this video is genuinely the best way to support independent analysis like this, because it helps this channel keep producing deep dives on stories the mainstream media rushes through too quickly. Let's bring this back to the core question we started with. Is Germany pushing Europe toward war with Russia, or is Germany simply preparing Europe to prevent one? The honest answer, based on everything we have covered, is that both things can be true at the same time, and that contradiction is exactly what makes this moment in history so unpredictable. Germany's leaders insist every step they are taking is purely defensive, purely about deterrence, purely about never again being caught unprepared the way Ukraine was in 2022. But intentions and outcomes do not always match in international politics. Nations have stumbled into wars before while genuinely believing they were only preparing to prevent one. What we do know for certain is this: the Germany of today is not the Germany of 10 years ago. Its military, its politics, and its role inside Europe have all fundamentally shifted, and there is no going back to the old model. Whether that shift ultimately protects the continent or drags it toward confrontation with Russia may be the defining geopolitical question of this entire decade. And that question will not be answered by politicians giving speeches in Berlin or Brussels. It will be answered by choices made in the coming months, choices that ordinary citizens like you and me are watching unfold in real time. Thank you for watching this deep dive all the way through. If you want more breakdowns like this one, explaining the real forces shaping our world, make sure you are subscribed to Jiang Analysis so you never miss the next video. Stay curious, stay informed, and I will see you in the next one.